The whiskey burns less now than it did an hour ago. I've been sitting here in the study, in this chair that has molded itself to my body over the years, watching the amber liquid catch what little light filters through the heavy curtains. The house settles around me with the familiar creaks of a life lived too long in one place. 32 years we've been in this house. 32 years of the same sounds, the same shadows falling across the same walls. Evelyn's voice drifts in from the kitchen, something about dinner being ready, about the roast getting cold. I hear her, but I don't answer. I can't answer. Not when this thing is sitting open in front of me, demanding attention I've spent decades refusing to give it. The yearbook fell open to page 47 when I pulled it from the shelf. I didn't mean for it to happen that way, but maybe some part of me remembered exactly where it would land. The pages have yellowed at the edges, and there's a coffee stain from God knows when. But the faces still stare back at me with that particular mixture of hope and terror that belongs only to 18-year-olds who think they know what comes next. But it's not the faces I'm looking at now. It's the piece of paper tucked between the pages, folded so many times the creases have worn soft as fabric. The edges are frayed where my fingers have worried at them over the years, in moments when I thought no one was looking, when I allowed myself to remember what I've spent most of my adult life trying to forget. Julian's handwriting hasn't changed in my memory. The same loose scrawl that made our teachers shake their heads. The same careless loops that somehow managed to look both hurried and deliberate. I can still see him writing it, bent over his desk in trigonometry, glancing up at me with that grin that made my stomach drop in ways I couldn't name then and still struggle to name now. The note says almost nothing. A joke about Coach Peterson's mustache, something about meeting after practice, a crude drawing of what might have been our chemistry teacher. Nothing that would raise an eyebrow if anyone else had found it. But at the bottom, in smaller letters, like an afterthought he wasn't sure he should include, he'd written something that changed everything. I run my thumb along those words now, feeling how the ink has faded but never quite disappeared. Just like he wrote it yesterday. Just like it was yesterday when he slipped it to me during the passing of papers, when his fingers brushed mine for a moment longer than necessary, when he looked at me with something in his eyes that I pretended not to understand. The memory unfolds whether I want it to or not. The empty locker room after everyone else had gone home. The sound of our voices echoing off the tile walls, too loud and then too quiet. The way he moved closer when he was talking, closer than teammates needed to be, closer than friends were supposed to stand. How when he dared me to prove I wasn't afraid of anything. I thought he meant jumping off the overpass or stealing beer from Murphy's corner store. I was wrong about what he meant. We both were, maybe. It started as a joke, the way terrible things sometimes do. A laugh that went on too long. A challenge that neither of us knew how to back down from. His shoulder against mine, solid and warm through his t-shirt. The smell of soap and sweat, and something else I couldn't identify then, but have never forgotten. The moment when joking became something else entirely, when the air between us grew thick and strange, and full of possibilities that had no names in our world. What happened next lasted maybe 30 seconds, maybe less. But it carved itself into me so deeply that 40 years later, I can still feel the exact pressure of his hand on my arm, still hear the way his breath caught when I didn't pull away. We never spoke of it afterward. Not once. The next day at school he was the same Julian he'd always been, loud and careless, and surrounded by the easy confidence of someone who belonged exactly where he was. And I became the Malcolm I thought I was supposed to be, the one who dated Sarah Morrison and talked about colleges and pretended that nothing had changed at all. But everything had changed. Everything. Evelyn calls again, her voice carrying a note of irritation now. "Malcolm," she says, and I can picture her standing in the doorway of the kitchen, one hand on her hip, wondering what's gotten into me tonight. Wondering why I'm sitting in the dark instead of joining her for the dinner she's prepared, the way I have every night for more than 30 years. I close the yearbook slowly, but I don't put the note back inside. Instead, I fold it along its familiar creases and slip it into my shirt pocket, right over my heart, where it feels like both a comfort and an accusation. The whiskey glass sits empty on the table beside me. Outside, The evening settles into full darkness, and somewhere in this house that has been my entire adult life, my wife waits for me to be the man she married. But tonight, for these few stolen moments, I let myself remember being 17 and terrified and alive in a way that I've spent 4 decades trying to forget. I eventually made it to dinner that night, though the roast had gone cold and Evelyn had already cleared her plate. She reheated mine in the microwave without comment, the way she's learned to do over the years when my silence is stretched too long. We ate in the dining room we furnished in 1987, surrounded by the same floral wallpaper that seemed sophisticated then and suffocating now. This is the architecture of my life. Beige walls lined with photographs that tell the story everyone expects to see. Kevin's high school graduation, then college, then his wedding to that nice girl from Connecticut. Sarah's soccer tournaments, her acceptance to law school, the grandchildren who visit twice a year and call me Grandpa Malcolm in voices that sound rehearsed. 23 years of Christmas mornings, birthday dinners, anniversary trips to places we thought we wanted to go. In every photograph, I am smiling. In every photograph, I look like a man who belongs exactly where he is. The house itself feels heavy with this history. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a 2-car garage that houses Evelyn's sedan and my truck. A basement where I keep boxes of things I've never looked at again. An attic full of decorations for holidays I've stopped feeling. The mortgage was paid off 8 years ago, and sometimes I catch myself wondering if that was a mistake. If having payments would have given us a reason to leave, to start over somewhere else, to become different versions of ourselves. But people like us don't start over. We maintain. We endure. We make the best of what we've built. Every morning at 6:15, my alarm goes off and I shower while Evelyn makes coffee. By 7, I'm driving the same route I've driven for 19 years, past the same strip malls and traffic lights, listening to the same radio station that plays the same songs I've heard 1,000 times. Lincoln High School sits on 40 acres of what used to be farmland, a brick building that tries to look timeless, but mostly looks tired. I park in the same spot in the faculty lot, 3rd row from the building, next to Henderson's ancient Honda. In my classroom, I teach the same American history curriculum I've taught for nearly 2 decades. The faces change every year, but the indifference remains constant. These kids look at me and see what I've become. Mr. Davidson, the history teacher who assigns too much reading and grades too strictly and tells the same stories about the Civil War that their older siblings heard before them. I am reliable. I am predictable. I am exactly what a 58-year-old high school teacher should be. They have no idea that I spend most of each day wondering how I ended up here. The other teachers respect me in the way they respect consistency. I serve on committees, attend faculty meetings, contribute to retirement gifts for colleagues I've never really known. In the break room, I listen to conversations about mortgages and marriages and children, nodding at appropriate moments, laughing when laughter is expected. Sometimes Janet from the English department asks me about Evelyn's garden, or Tom from mathematics mentions something about weekend plans I should make. I participate in these conversations the way I participate in everything else. Competently, politely, from a distance that no one seems to notice but me. At home, the evenings follow their own predictable rhythm. Evelyn tells me about her book club, her volunteer work at the library, the phone calls with her sister in Arizona. I listen and respond in ways that keep the conversation moving without requiring me to reveal anything real. We watch the news together, comment on the weather, discuss plans for the weekend that will unfold exactly like every weekend before it. We haven't made love in 3 years. Maybe 4. The absence crept in so gradually that neither of us acknowledged it happening, and now it feels too large to discuss. We sleep in the same bed, on our designated sides, careful not to brush against each other in the dark. Sometimes I wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and listen to her breathing, steady and familiar, and wonder if she ever lies awake wondering how we got here. If she ever thinks about the man she married and tries to reconcile him with the one sleeping 18 inches away from her. We were happy once, I think. In the beginning, when everything felt possible and we were building something together. Evelyn was 24 when we met, teaching elementary school, and living in a studio apartment with plants on every windowsill. She laughed easily then, and often. She had opinions about movies and books and places she wanted to travel. She believed in things. I loved her, in the way I understood love at 26. She was kind and smart and wanted the same things I thought I wanted: a house, children, stability, respect, a normal life. When I proposed, she cried happy tears and called her mother from the restaurant, and I felt like I was doing exactly what I was supposed to do. The wedding was everything she dreamed of. The house came 2 years later. Kevin arrived when we'd been married for 4 years, Sarah 3 years after that. We built the life we'd planned, piece by piece, decision by decision, until we woke up one day in the middle of it and realized we were strangers sharing the same address. But that's not entirely fair to Evelyn. The distance isn't just something that happened to us. It's something I created, carefully and deliberately, year after year. Every time she reached for something real in me, I offered her something safe instead. Every time she asked me what I was thinking, I gave her an answer that revealed nothing. I have spent 32 years of marriage protecting her from the truth of who I am, and in doing so, I've protected myself from having to face it. She deserves better than half a husband. She deserves someone who doesn't carry secrets that weigh more than love. But admitting that would mean admitting everything else, and there are some doors that, once opened, can never be closed again. So instead, I remained the reliable man she married, the one who mows the lawn on Saturdays and remembers anniversaries and never gives her reason to question the life we've built together. The only person who knows the truth about that afternoon in the locker room is me. For 40 years, I have carried Julian's name like a stone in my chest, never speaking it aloud, never allowing myself to wonder what became of him or whether he ever thinks about that moment that changed everything and nothing. Until now. Until tonight, sitting in my study with a note that should have been thrown away decades ago, feeling the weight of a life I've lived at arm's length from my own heart. The envelope arrives on a Tuesday in October, mixed in with the utility bills and grocery store circulars that comprise most of our mail these days. It's cream-colored, heavier stock than usual, with Lincoln High School's familiar eagle logo embossed in the corner. My name is printed in that overly formal script that reunion committees always seem to favor, as if elegant lettering might convince us that 40 years haven't really passed at all. Evelyn finds it first, as she sorts through the mail at the kitchen counter while I grade quizzes about the Industrial Revolution. She holds it up with the kind of excitement she reserves for rare occasions these days, her face brightening in a way that reminds me of the woman I married. "Look at this," she says, already tearing open the flap before I can respond. "Your 40th high school reunion. Can you believe it's been 40 years? She reads aloud from the invitation, her voice animated by the novelty of it all. October 28th at the high school gymnasium. Dinner, dancing, a memorial for classmates we've lost. The reunion committee, headed by someone named Patricia Morrison, promises an evening of reconnecting with old friends and reliving the best years of our lives." I take the invitation from her and study it, though every word feels like it's written in a foreign language. There's a photograph of our graduating class, all 237 of us arranged in rows on the gymnasium bleachers. I find myself in the third row, 17 years old, and trying to look serious for posterity. My hair was darker then, my face thinner, my eyes holding something that I can't quite name anymore. Julian is in the second row, for people to the left. Even in black and white, even reduced to the size of a postage stamp, his smile jumps out at me. That crooked grin that made teachers shake their heads and made something in my chest flutter in ways I couldn't understand. "We should go," Evelyn says, leaning against the counter with her coffee cup cradled in both hands. "It might be fun to see everyone again. I wonder what they're all doing now, where they ended up." I fold the invitation and set it aside, returning to the stack of quizzes with forced concentration. I haven't thought about most of those people in decades. I tell her, which is true enough. But there's one person I think about more than I should, one name that surfaces in my mind at the strangest moments, and the thought of seeing him again makes my hands unsteady. "That's exactly why we should go," she insists. "Don't you want to know what happened to your old friends? What about that boy you used to hang around with, the one on the baseball team? Julian something. Julian Monroe. I say before I can stop myself, and the name feels strange on my tongue after so many years of silence. Like speaking a word in a language I've forgotten I knew. Yes, him. You two were inseparable senior year. I bet he'd love to see you again. She means it innocently, of course. Evelyn has no reason to suspect that Julian Monroe was anything more to me than a teammate, a friend, a memory filed away with all the other artifacts of adolescence. She doesn't know about the note still folded in my shirt pocket, doesn't know about the dreams that have started visiting me in the early hours of morning, dreams where I'm 17 again and standing too close to a boy whose smile could stop my heart. I managed some non-committal response about being too busy, about having papers to grade and parent conferences to prepare for. But Evelyn has that determined look I've learned to recognize over 32 years of marriage. The one that means she's already decided we're going whether I want to or not. Over the following weeks, she mentions the reunion at least once a day. She buys a new dress, navy blue with small silver buttons, and asks me to dig my good suit out of the back of the closet. She contacts Patricia Morrison to confirm our attendance, signs us up to help with the memorial slideshow, volunteers to bring appetizers. The reunion becomes her project, her excitement growing with each detail arranged. Meanwhile, I find myself slipping further into the past. The dreams start small at first, fragments of memory surfacing while I sleep. The sound of cleats on concrete. The smell of fresh-cut grass mixed with teenage sweat. Voices calling across the parking lot after practice. Julian's laugh rising above the rest like a song I'd forgotten I knew. But the dreams grow more vivid as the date approaches. I'm back in that locker room, feeling the weight of Julian's dare hanging between us like a challenge neither of us understood. I can see every detail with crystalline clarity. The way his hair fell across his forehead, damp with sweat. The constellation of freckles across his shoulders. The moment when teasing became something else entirely, when the space between us grew charged with possibility. I wake from these dreams with my heart racing, 40 years collapsing into nothing. In the darkness of my bedroom, with Evelyn sleeping peacefully beside me, I feel like that 17-year-old boy again, terrified and exhilarated and completely out of my depth. The day of the reunion arrives gray and cold, with the promise of rain hanging heavy in the October air. I spend an extra 15 minutes getting dressed, adjusting my tie, running my fingers through hair that's gone more gray than brown. In the mirror, I look like exactly what I am. A middle-aged man playing dress-up, trying to convince himself he belongs at a party celebrating a time when he felt most like himself and least sure of who that self was supposed to be. The high school looks smaller than I remember, though they've added a new wing and repaved the parking lot. Balloons in our class colors, red and white, flutter from lampposts that weren't there when we graduated. Inside, the gymnasium has been transformed with round tables and string lights, an attempt to make the space where we once ran laps and played dodgeball feel elegant and nostalgic. The noise hits me first. 200 voices trying to bridge 4 decades of silence. Everyone talking at once. Everyone trying to prove they remember each other better than they do. Name tags with our senior pictures help bridge the gap between memory and reality. 18-year-old faces pasted onto bodies that show the full weight of middle age. Evelyn dives in immediately, gravitating toward a cluster of women who were in her book club 20 years ago. I follow more reluctantly, accepting handshakes from men whose names I have to read off their name tags, nodding at wives I've never met who smile politely and ask what I'm doing these days. And then, across the room, by the punch bowl that sits in exactly the same spot it occupied at our senior prom, I see him. Julian is heavier now, his hair silver where it once was gold, his face carrying lines that speak of laughter and worry and all the years that have passed since we were boys together. But his smile is unchanged, that crooked grin that made my stomach drop 40 years ago and makes it drop again now. Our eyes meet across the gymnasium floor, across 4 decades of careful silence, across the width of lives lived in different directions. For a moment, the noise fades and the crowd disappears, and we are 17 again, standing in an empty locker room, discovering that some dares are meant to be taken. He raises his hand in a small wave, and I feel something I buried long ago come rushing back with terrifying clarity. The weight of the secret I've carried all these years suddenly feels impossibly heavy and impossibly light, all at once. He makes his way toward me slowly, stopping to exchange pleasantries with other classmates. But his path is deliberate. I watch him navigate the crowd, noting how easily he moves among these people who were once our shared world. Some things never change. Julian always had a gift for making others feel like they mattered, like their stories were worth hearing. When he finally reaches me, we shake hands like the middle-aged men we've become. His grip is firm, calloused in ways I don't remember from when we were boys. There's a moment when our hands linger together a beat too long, and I feel that familiar flutter in my chest that I thought I'd successfully buried decades ago. "Malcolm Davidson," he says, and my name sounds different in his voice. Richer somehow. "I was hoping you'd be here." "Julian Monroe," I reply, though his name feels strange on my tongue after years of silence. "You look good." It's a lie and the truth at the same time. He's aged, certainly. The lines around his eyes speak of years spent squinting into sunlight, and there's a softness around his middle that wasn't there when we were 17. But there's something about him that seems more settled, more comfortable in his own skin than I remember, as if the years have taught him something I never learned. We talk about safe things first. His work in construction, managing crews that build houses across 3 counties. My teaching, the students who remind me why I chose this profession, and the ones who make me question it. We compare notes on our children, though his voice carries a wistfulness when he mentions his daughter living in Portland, how he only sees her twice a year. "Divorce is hard," he says simply, and I nod as if I understand, though my marriage has never been tested by anything as clean as separation, just by the slow erosion of pretending to be someone I'm not. Evelyn appears beside me, bright and social, extending her hand to Julian with the warmth she reserves for meeting new people. She asks him about his family, his work, his memories of high school, all the questions that fill the space between strangers. Julian answers graciously, but I catch him looking at me when she's not watching, those same gray eyes that once undid me completely. After an hour of this careful choreography, Julian leans close enough that I can smell his cologne, something woodsy and unfamiliar. "I should get going," he says, but then adds, quietly enough that only I can hear, "It's good to see you, Malcolm. Really good." He slips me his business card as we shake hands goodbye, his fingers brushing mine in a way that might be accidental. On the back, in handwriting that's neater than I remember but unmistakably his, he's written his personal number and a single word, "Call." I spend the drive home listening to Evelyn recap the evening, cataloging who looked older than expected and who had aged gracefully, which marriages had survived and which had not. She mentions Julian only in passing, noting that he seemed nice, that it must be lonely being divorced at our age. I make appropriate responses while the business card burns in my jacket pocket like evidence of a crime not yet committed. That night, I lie awake listening to Evelyn's steady breathing and running my thumb across Julian's phone number, the way I once traced the words in his note. The numbers seem to glow in the darkness of our bedroom, daring me to use them. I wait 3 days before calling, long enough to convince myself it's just innocent curiosity, not quite long enough to forget the way he said my name at the reunion. He answers on the second ring, and when I identify myself, his voice warms in a way that makes my chest tight. "I was wondering if you'd call," he says, and I can hear the smile in his words. We arranged to meet for coffee the following Saturday, at a place downtown that neither of us has been to before. Neutral territory, I tell myself, though I'm not sure what I think we're negotiating. The coffee shop is one of those deliberately rustic places that tries to recreate a simpler time that never actually existed. Edison bulbs hang from exposed beams, and everything is painted in shades of chalk and cream. I arrive first and choose a table in the back corner, somewhere we can talk without being overheard, though I'm not sure what we have to say that requires privacy. Julian walks in 10 minutes later, scanning the room until he finds me. He's wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that brings out the gray in his eyes, and he moves with the easy confidence I remember from high school. He looks like a man who has made peace with who he is, and I envy him that certainty. Over coffee that grows cold while we talk, we begin to fill in the 40 years between 17 and now. Julian tells me about his marriage to Susan, how they met in college and divorced after 23 years when they realized they'd grown into different people. He talks about his daughter Emma, who inherited his stubborn streak and his ex-wife's practical nature. He mentions the house he built with his own hands, the workshop where he restores old furniture, the life he's created for himself since starting over at 50. I tell him about my teaching, about Kevin and Sarah and the grandchildren who call me Grandpa Malcolm in voices that sound rehearsed. I don't mention the growing distance in my marriage, the way Evelyn and I have become strangers sharing the same address. Some truths feel too large for coffee shop conversations, but there's something beneath our words, a current neither of us acknowledges directly. When Julian talks about his divorce, his eyes search mine as if looking for understanding. When I mention feeling restless lately, unsettled in ways I can't explain, he nods like he recognizes something familiar. The conversation flows easier than it should after 40 years. We remember the same teachers, the same ridiculous school policies, the same cast of characters who populated our teenage world. But we also remember each other in ways that surprise me. Julian recalls things I'd forgotten about myself. How I always brought extra pencils to class, how I helped him with his English essays, how I could make him laugh during the most boring assemblies. "You were always the smart one," he says, stirring sugar into his third cup of coffee. "I used to copy your homework in calculus." I never minded. I tell him, and realize it's true. I liked feeling useful to him, liked being someone he needed, even in such a small way. As the afternoon stretches on, Julian's teasing returns gradually, like muscle memory awakening after a long sleep. He makes jokes about my tie, too formal for a Saturday afternoon. He comments on how I still drum my fingers when I'm thinking, the same habit that used to drive our teachers crazy. But there's something different about the teasing now. It's gentler, more intimate, as if we're sharing a private language that doesn't require translation. "You haven't changed as much as you think," he says at one point, his voice dropping low enough that I have to lean forward to hear him. "You still get that look when you're trying not to laugh." "What look?" "Like you're fighting with yourself. Like there's something you want to say, but don't dare." The words hang between us, heavier than they should be, and I feel exposed in a way that has nothing to do with the conversation we've been having. Julian holds my gaze steadily, and I remember how he always could see through my careful composure to whatever was churning underneath. We part ways in the parking lot as the sun is setting, shaking hands again like civilized men. But this time, there's no mistaking the way he holds on a moment longer than necessary, the way his thumb traces across my knuckles before he lets go. "Drive carefully," he says, and I nod and promise to call again soon, though we both know it's more than a promise. It's a commitment to something neither of us has named yet. That night, I tell Evelyn I ran into Julian and we grab coffee, catching up on old times. She smiles and says that's nice, that it must have been good to reconnect with an old friend. The word friend sits strangely in the air between us, too small for what I'm feeling and too large for what I can admit. The phone calls begin the next week. Brief at first, just to say hello, to continue conversations that feel unfinished. But they grow longer, more frequent. Julian calls during my lunch break, his voice a welcome interruption to the routine of faculty meetings and lesson plans. I find myself calling him in the evenings, after Evelyn has gone upstairs to read, my voice lowered to avoid disturbing the careful quiet of our house. We talk about everything and nothing. Books we've read, places we've traveled, movies that made us think or cry or laugh until our sides hurt. Julian tells me stories about job sites where nothing goes according to plan, about the satisfaction of building something with his hands that will outlast him. I tell him about students who surprise me with their insights, about the moment when history stops being dates and names and becomes human. But underneath these conversations, something else is building. A recognition that grows stronger with each call, each shared laugh, each comfortable silence that neither of us feels compelled to fill. I find myself looking forward to the sound of his voice, measuring my days by when I might talk to him next. 3 weeks after our coffee shop reunion, Julian suggests we meet again. This time, he proposes a walk along the river trail, something more private than the public space we shared before. When he says it, my pulse quickens in a way that has nothing to do with physical exertion and everything to do with the boy I once was, standing in a locker room, learning that some dares are meant to be taken. The river trail winds through what used to be farmland before the town grew up around it. Ancient oaks line the path, their branches forming a canopy that filters the late afternoon light into patterns that shift and dance with every breeze. It's a place I've driven past countless times, but never walked, never thought to explore. Julian suggested it because it's quiet, he said, because we can talk without interruption. We've been meeting like this for 6 weeks now, these careful encounters that feel both innocent and dangerous. Always in public spaces, always with reasonable explanations should anyone ask. Two old friends catching up, reliving shared memories, filling in the gaps that 40 years have created. Nothing that couldn't be explained away, nothing that crosses any lines that matter. But the lines keep shifting. Julian walks beside me with the easy stride of someone who spends his days outdoors, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, his breath visible in small puffs in the cold November air. We've been talking about his daughter Emma, how she started teaching elementary school in Portland, how proud he is of her independence even though he misses her terribly. She's strong like her mother, he says, kicking at a cluster of fallen leaves. Gets that stubborn streak honest, though I can't claim credit for the practical part of her nature. You raised her well, I tell him, and mean it. The way he talks about Emma, with such obvious love and pride, makes something ache in my chest. There's a simplicity to his affection that I envy, an ability to love without reservation that I've never learned to master. We walk in comfortable silence for a while, our footsteps muffled by the carpet of leaves beneath our feet. The river runs parallel to the trail, its surface dark and still, reflecting the bare branches of trees that won't see green again until spring. There's something peaceful about this place, something that makes the careful distance I usually maintain feel unnecessary. Julian stops suddenly, turning to face me with an expression I can't quite read. We've reached a small clearing where someone has placed a wooden bench facing the water, weathered gray by seasons of rain and sun. Can I tell you something? He asks, and his voice carries a weight that makes my pulse quicken. Something I've been thinking about since the reunion? I nod, though part of me wants to keep walking, to avoid whatever confession is building in the space between us. I used to think about you, he says simply. After graduation, I mean. For years, actually. I'd wonder what you were doing, where you ended up, if you ever thought about that afternoon in the locker room. The words hit me like cold water, washing away 40 years of careful pretense. I open my mouth to respond, to deflect, to make some joke that will return us to safer ground, but nothing comes out. I know we never talked about it, Julian continues, sitting down on the bench and looking out at the water instead of at me. But it meant something to me, more than I knew how to handle back then. I sit beside him, leaving space between us, but not as much as I should. The wood is cold through my jacket, and I can feel the dampness of approaching evening settling around us like a blanket. Julian, I start, but he shakes his head. Let me finish, he says. Please. I've been carrying this around for 40 years, and I need to say it out loud at least once. He tells me about his marriage to Susan, how he loved her in the way he thought he was supposed to love a wife, how they built a good life together even though something always felt slightly off, slightly incomplete. He talks about the divorce, how it wasn't anyone's fault exactly, just two people who realized they'd been trying to be something they weren't. I spent my whole marriage feeling like I was playing a part, he says, his voice quiet but steady. Like I was performing the role of husband without ever fully inhabiting it. Susan deserved better than that. She deserved someone who could love her completely, without reservations. The parallels to my own life are so obvious they make my throat tight. 32 years of marriage to Evelyn, 32 years of performing the role of husband, while keeping the deepest part of myself locked away. The careful distance, the polite conversations, the growing silence between us that we both pretend not to notice. After the divorce, Julian continues, I started thinking about what I actually wanted instead of what I thought I should want. And you were part of that. You were always part of that, even when I tried to convince myself otherwise. He turns to look at me then, his gray eyes holding mine with an intensity that makes it hard to breathe. I can see the 17-year-old boy in his face, the one who dared me to prove I wasn't afraid of anything, the one whose smile could stop my heart. I've thought about you too, I managed to say, though the words feel like they're being dragged out of some deep place I've kept sealed for decades. More than I should have, more than I could admit. The admission hangs between us like a bridge I didn't know I was building. Julian's expression softens, and he reaches over to cover my hand with his, the first time we've touched since shaking hands at the reunion. What happened between us back then, he says, his thumb tracing across my knuckles the way it did in the parking lot after coffee. It wasn't just teenage confusion or experimentation or whatever I told myself it was. At least not for me. I know, I whisper, because suddenly I do know, have always known, despite spending 40 years trying to convince myself otherwise. For me either. The space between us feels charged, the way it did in that locker room when we were 17 and discovering that some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. Julian's hand is warm on mine, familiar and strange at the same time, and I can feel my carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. Malcolm, he says, and my name in his voice sounds like a question and an answer all at once. I should pull away. I should stand up and walk back to my car and drive home to Evelyn and pretend this conversation never happened. I should protect the life I've built, even if it's built on foundations that were never entirely solid. Instead, I let him lean closer. Instead, I stay perfectly still as his free hand comes up to touch my face, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw with a gentleness that makes my chest ache. Is this okay? He asks, and I nod because I can't find words for what this is, can't name the feeling of coming home to a place I didn't know I'd been missing. When our lips meet, it's tentative at first, careful, as if we're both afraid we might break something fragile. But then Julian's hand moves to the back of my neck, and I'm 17 again, learning that some hungers can lie dormant for decades and still wake up ravenous. The kiss lasts maybe 10 seconds, maybe less, but it's enough to shatter everything I've spent my adult life believing about myself. When we separate, I'm shaking, not from the cold, but from the recognition of something I've denied for so long, I'd almost convinced myself it never existed. Julian rests his forehead against mine, his breath warm against my face. I've wanted to do that for 40 years, he whispers, and I believe him because I can feel the truth of it in the way he's holding me, like he's afraid I might disappear. We sit in silence as the sun sets behind the trees, our hands still linked, the space between us forever changed. I should feel guilty, should be thinking about Evelyn waiting at home, should be cataloging all the ways this moment will complicate everything I've built my life around. Instead, I feel awake for the first time in decades. Terrifyingly, completely awake. The changes start small. A distraction during faculty meetings that I can't quite shake. Papers graded more slowly, my comments less thorough than usual. I find myself staring out the classroom window during prep periods, my mind wandering to a bench by the river, to the weight of Julian's hand in mine, to the way my name sounds in his voice. At home, the shifts are more obvious. I'm late for dinner twice in 1 week, claiming parent conferences that ran long. I take longer showers, as if I can wash away the guilt and confusion that cling to me like smoke. In bed, I lie awake listening to Evelyn's breathing and trying to reconcile the man who kissed Julian Monroe with the man who has shared this mattress for 32 years. Julian and I meet again the following week, and the week after that. We're careful to vary the locations, the times. A different coffee shop across town. The public library on a weekday afternoon, pretending to browse books while stealing moments of conversation in the stacks. Another walk, this time through the park where we played Little League as children, though we're both too aware of what happened at the river to risk being alone like that again. But the awareness is always there now, humming beneath every word we exchange. The knowledge that we've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed, that we've awakened something that has slept for 40 years and refuses to go quietly back to rest. Julian doesn't push. He's patient in a way that both comforts and torments me, never asking for more than I can give, never demanding answers to questions I'm not ready to face. When I mention feeling conflicted, he simply nods. When I talk about Evelyn without really talking about her, he listens without judgment. He understands the weight of the choice I'm carrying, perhaps better than I do myself. But Evelyn notices. Of course she notices. After 32 years of marriage, she knows my rhythms, my habits, my tells. She begins asking about my late nights, my distraction, the way I've started taking phone calls in my study with the door closed. "You seem different lately," she says one evening over dinner, her tone carefully casual in the way that means she's been thinking about this for a while. "More restless. Is everything all right at school?" I give her the usual assurances. Budget concerns, difficult students, the stress of midterm evaluations. She nods and returns to her salad, but I catch her watching me when she thinks I'm not looking, her expression puzzled and increasingly concerned. The confrontation comes on a Thursday night in December. I'm later than usual, having spent 2 hours walking through downtown with Julian, our conversation ranging from books to baseball to the impossibility of our situation. When I arrive home, Evelyn is waiting in the living room, still dressed but clearly ready for bed, her hands folded in her lap in a way that signals serious discussion ahead. "We need to talk," she says, and the words land in my stomach like stones. I sit across from her in the chair I've occupied for countless evening conversations over the years, but tonight the familiar furniture feels foreign, like I'm playing a scene from someone else's life. "Malcolm," she begins, her voice steady but strained, "I don't know what's going on with you lately, but something has changed. You're here but not here, if that makes sense. You're going through the motions, but your mind is somewhere else entirely." I want to deny it, to offer explanations that will satisfy her concern without revealing the truth that would destroy everything. But the words stick in my throat because she's right, and we both know it. "Is there someone else?" she asks, and the question hangs between us like a bridge neither of us wants to cross. The silence stretches long enough to become an answer. I watch her face change as the implications settle, see the moment when suspicion becomes certainty. Her expression doesn't crumble so much as reorganize itself, shifting from confusion to a kind of resigned understanding that breaks my heart. I can't lie to her. Not about this. Not when she's asking directly. Not when the truth is written in every late night and distracted conversation we've had for the past 2 months. But I also can't tell her the whole truth. Can't explain that the someone else is a man whose name I've carried like a secret for 40 years. Whose kiss has undone everything I thought I knew about myself. So I offer her silence instead, which speaks louder than any confession. "How long?" she asks, and her voice is smaller now, more fragile. "It's not what you think," I tell her, which is both true and completely inadequate. "But it's something," she says, and I nod because denying that would be cruel. She doesn't ask for details, doesn't demand names or explanations. Maybe she doesn't want to know, or maybe she already suspects more than she's saying. Instead, she sits quietly for a long moment, her hands twisted together in her lap, processing the end of something we both saw coming but never acknowledged. "I still love you," I tell her, and it's true, though the love feels different now, complicated by the recognition of all the ways I've been absent from our marriage, all the parts of myself I've never shared with her. "I know," she says, and there's a sadness in her voice that cuts deeper than anger would have. "But it's not enough anymore, is it? For either of us." The next morning, we move through our usual routine with exaggerated politeness, as if we're strangers sharing temporary space. Evelyn makes coffee and toast. I read the paper, we comment on the weather and the day's schedule. But there's a finality to these gestures, a sense that we're performing them for the last time. That afternoon, I called Julian from my classroom during lunch, needing to hear his voice, needing the comfort of speaking to someone who knows the truth about who I'm becoming. We can't keep doing this, I tell him without preamble. Meeting like this, pretending we're just old friends catching up. It's not fair to anyone. I know, he says, and I can hear the weight in his voice. I've been thinking the same thing. There's a long pause, and I can picture him in his workshop, sawdust in his hair, his hands stilled on whatever piece of wood he's been shaping. He's waiting for me to make the choice we both know is coming, the decision that will determine what happens next. I won't live in shadows, Malcolm, he says finally. I did that for too long in my marriage, and I can't do it again. But I also won't be the reason you destroy your life if that's not what you want. What do you want? I ask, though I already know the answer. I want you, he says simply. I want to see what we could be together, without secrets, without guilt, without having to pretend we're something we're not. But only if that's what you want too. The honesty in his voice, the complete absence of manipulation or pressure, makes the choice both easier and impossibly hard. He's offering me a chance at authenticity, at living the life I've always been too afraid to claim. But taking that chance means destroying the life I've built with Evelyn, admitting that 32 years of marriage were built on a foundation that was never entirely solid. You have to decide, Julian continues, his voice gentle but firm. What do you want the rest of your life to be? The question follows me home, echoes in my head during dinner with Evelyn, keeps me awake long into the night. Two lives spread out before me like paths diverging in a forest. One familiar, safe, built on compromise and careful distance. The other terrifying and unknown, but authentic in a way that makes my chest ache with possibility. To choose one, I realize, is to destroy the other. And I'm running out of time to live suspended between both. Here I am again, in the same chair where this all began. 3 weeks have passed since my conversation with Evelyn. 3 weeks of careful politeness and growing silence that fills our house like smoke. We move around each other like strangers sharing temporary space, speaking when necessary, but never about what matters most. The study feels smaller tonight, the walls pressing closer in the dim lamplight. On the desk in front of me sit two objects that represent the entirety of my adult life. My wedding ring, removed an hour ago after 32 years, leaving a pale band of skin that looks naked and unfamiliar. And Julian's note, unfolded for the 1,000th time, its edges soft with handling, the ink faded but still legible. From somewhere in the house comes the sound of Evelyn moving through her evening routine. Cabinet doors closing, the dishwasher starting its familiar cycle, footsteps on the stairs. Soon she'll call out good night, and I'll respond as I always do, and she'll go to bed alone while I sit down here pretending to have somewhere else to be. Malcolm, she calls now, her voice carrying that same distant note it's held for weeks. Are you coming up soon? I don't answer. I can't answer. Not when I'm sitting here staring at these two artifacts of my life, trying to understand how I became a man who kept a secret for 40 years, who built a marriage on the foundation of everything he couldn't say. Instead, I open the desk drawer and pull out a sheet of writing paper, cream-colored and heavy. The fountain pen feels foreign in my hand after years of grading papers with cheap ballpoints, but tonight calls for something more deliberate, more permanent. The blank page stares back at me, waiting, not for a letter to Evelyn, though she deserves one, not for a confession to Julian, though he deserves that too. This letter is for me, for the boy who was too afraid to speak his truth, and the man who spent decades burying it. I begin to write, my hand trembling at first, then growing steadier as the words flow. I have lived my entire life in careful compromise, choosing safety over authenticity, respectability over truth. I married a woman I loved because loving her felt manageable, controllable, acceptable. I built a career that asked nothing of my heart, raised children who knew only the version of their father I thought they could handle. The pen moves across the paper, each word feeling like a small revolution. Through the window, I can see our neighbor's house, windows glowing warm with the ordinary happiness I once thought I wanted. Julian Monroe kissed me when I was 17, and I kissed him back. For 40 years, I've told myself it was meaningless, a moment of confusion that had nothing to do with who I really was. But tonight, writing in the silence of my study, I can finally admit the truth. It was the most honest moment of my life. Everything else has been performance. My handwriting looks the same as it did in high school, though the words I'm forming now are ones that 17-year-old boy could never have imagined having the courage to write. I want to wake up next to someone who knows all of me and loves me anyway. I want to introduce my partner to my children without shame or apology. I want to grow old with someone who makes me feel alive in the way Julian did that afternoon by the river, when he kissed me and I remembered what it felt like to be completely myself. The letter grows to 2 pages, then 3, my hand cramping from the unfamiliar act of writing by hand for so long. I write about the weight of secrets, about the cost of living at arm's length from your own heart. I write about Evelyn, who deserved a husband who could love her without reservation, and about the children who deserve to know their father as he truly is, not as the careful construction he's presented them. Most of all, I write about Julian, about the man who had the courage to live authentically after his divorce, who waited patiently for me to find the same courage, who asked me the question that changed everything. What do you want the rest of your life to be? Upstairs, water runs in the bathroom. Evelyn getting ready for bed, going through rituals that have defined our evenings for 3 decades. In a few minutes, she might call down to me again, asking if I'm coming to bed soon. And for the first time in our marriage, I'll tell her no. I fold the letter carefully and place it in the desk drawer, next to the space where Julian's note has lived all these years. Tomorrow, I'll have the conversations that will change everything. I'll sit down with Evelyn and give her the honesty our marriage has never had, even if it breaks both our hearts. I'll call Julian and tell him I'm ready to find out who we could be together. Tonight, though, I sit with the weight of my choice, feeling simultaneously terrified and more alive than I have in years. The wedding ring catches the lamplight, a circle of gold that once symbolized forever but now represents a door closing. Julian's note lies open beside it, faded but still carrying the promise of a dare finally accepted. Outside, December wind rattles the windows, and upstairs, Evelyn calls my name one more time. I don't answer. Instead, I turn off the lamp and sit in the darkness, listening to my own breathing, feeling the presence of the letter I've written to myself, the first completely honest thing I've put on paper in 40 years. It's not a conclusion. It's a beginning, a quiet, irrevocable step into the man I've always been but was never brave enough to become. The pen sits on the desk beside the letter, ready for whatever comes next. And for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid to find out what that might be.